I don't know if you can hear me or if I'm supposed to be talking.
Oh, no, we can hear you.
I was in another session and I jumped in here because I just wanted to see what you were about here.
Yeah. Well, we're waiting because there was a switch over, and now a couple of people joined, and now one left. It's weird because it seems like it's so we were trying to see how many folks it was leveling off at before we started going. So
yeah, and you feel free to delete me anytime. I don't need to be on video. I'd rather just listen.
And since you're here, tell us, like, what was it that intrigued you? Like, what was it that made you think, oh, let me check that out?
It was the title, disrupting. I consider myself a disruptor, and sustainability is really important to me. I don't know, something about like just that. I don't want to be status quo in my work. So
yeah,
I think that's what really pulled me to you.
Excellent.
Okay, that's awesome.
Well, and it's just us right now. So I am wondering, so how do you want to do this, Rita? Do you want to, literally it's just us. So do we want to just have a conversation and go through some of the slides and just talk a little bit? Or do you want to try to present? I know there is the video recording part, but I'm also a little, I want to be respectful of you, Hannah, too. So
yeah. So, oh, go ahead. Anna, maybe I wonder if you want to like just chat about when you talk about sustainability, maybe we can like deep dive into your topic and then if people join, we can move to the regular slides, or if you prefer, we could just go through the regular slides. What's your preference?
I say just go with what you have and then we just keep going. I think what's really hard for these sessions is everything's overlapping in time. So all the things I want to do, like I had to get out early from this last one to come to yours, and I'd have to leave early to go to the next one that I want to go to.
Yeah.
So they're overlapping. So they're overlapping so much. So like people might want to come to yours, but there's still 15 more minutes than like another one.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
I did not even know.
So I think, and that's what's difficult.
Yeah.
And that's a great sign for the other session, because that means that people are enjoying it, hopefully. So that's a good thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, let's get started. Okay. Dave, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Okay. So, and we'll remove, do you want to remove Anna?
Remove me, if you will.
Have
that'd be great.
Be on video on that.
Thank you.
Because it is recording. Sarita, you want to do that since you have the power to do that? I don't.
Sure.
Oh, I think I can leave it.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for joining us, Anna, because that was really great to see you.
Yes.
Yes.
I love your hair, by the way.
Say it again.
Okay. Do you want to exit out, Sarita?
Hold on a second. I didn't hear you.
All right.
Okay. There you go. Okay. So let's get started here. And so today we're talking about disrupting the status quo, something both Sarita and I are very passionate about. And of course, there's an organizational concept here, but there's just your community also. And obviously this year has reminded us more than ever that there's a lot of that. So just a quick intro. I'm Dave Mathias, and I am one of the founder of a company called Beyond the Data. And Sarita's with me today. Sarita, what do you do?
Hi, I'm Sarita Parikh. I am a co-founder of a startup called Jomanity.
Awesome. And doing some social good. You have a panel even after this. So you're doing back-to-back Twin City Startup.
I'm doing back-to-back.
Yes, nice. Right. Yeah. So we got to keep you on track, or you can't moderate a panel without you being there. So let's roll into the next slide. And, so when we talk about the status quo, there's this status quo bias, individuals, organizations, we know we have. So what are some of the things that you've seen, Sarita, on the status quo bias?
I think it's human nature to really like some things that are relatively stable and relatively comfortable. And so that's something that is probably at the heart of status quo. There's probably a few things that are at the heart of it. Yeah,
that stability and comfort is man, it's just, especially winter is going to be coming around the corner, and we all have our comfortable, how do we survive winter in Minnesota and or wherever you are. And of course, there's also like Halloween's coming around, right? Scary. So things known as scary. And, even though you might not like your known, you might not like your boss, you might not like exactly how things are done in your community, the unknown can be scary sometimes.
Right. And it can feel like the risks. I think this is one of the things you're going to talk about in a little bit, just this idea of like what I have already is known. And all of these opportunities out there, even though there's a lot of upside, there could also be downside. And so that risk can feel heavily weighted to the downside.
Yeah, and certainly when you're not certain, you're more likely to say, I'll just keep where I'm at. It's it's not too bad. It can't be, so unless you're really motivated, you're probably not going to move off that. So most drivers of change are not rewarded is the other challenge. So as we go through this, so if you are somebody that sticks your neck out in your organization or in your community, oftentimes we want to think that we're going to be that heroic person that's going to be well rewarded for what we do. But in reality is most people that really make significant change in the world are actually not even people that we know about. Oftentimes we hear about the big names that, of course, in history, but many people have made big sacrifices to get things advanced, whether it's in large historic events or just even in your organization.
Mm-hmm. So what we wanted to do today was look at, based on history and best practices and social sciences, what are 9 rules of thumb for disrupting the status quo? So like any rule of thumb, there's rarely hard and fast rules, especially when it comes to human behavior. There is never going to be a one size fits all. But these are ideas that have seen evidence over time through history, both in corporate world and the nonprofit world and amongst cultural changes. So let's get started. The first one is to know your mission. And so this sounds probably pretty straightforward, but sometimes people have like a mission of like, world peace. And you're like, that's a great mission. I like your mission, but you want to write it down and you want to understand like, what is the path, at least based on what you know right now? What are some of the things that will get you there? Why is this something that's important to you? What's going to happen, especially if you have something that's audacious or something that's big, or especially something that involves culture change and behavior change, is that even the best laid plans are not going to work out the way that you expect. You will come across people who really oppose what you're trying to do. You'll uncover things that you didn't expect. And so when you write it down at the beginning, this gives you clarity on like what it is that you're setting out to do. It helps you understand why you're setting out to do it. And down the road, when you're derailed or when you're demoralized, this is something that can really lift you up. My startup is something that is audacious and potentially, I think people might think it's a little bit dreamy-eyed. And I wonder that myself sometimes. And so I go back and I look at, what did I write? Why did I set out to do this? And it really bolsters me.
And the reason why we had this image of the space shuttle, of course, you go back to the landing on the moon and you look back in history, it was one of those really definable goals. We're going to get a person on the moon before the end of the decade. And of course, this is one we know in history, and we probably remember you might have heard the speech or being replayed. I wasn't live then, but certainly that was a very clear, we are going to land a person on the moon by the end of the decade. And so there's a definitive time, there's a distinct object that you're going to do. And to be honest, at the time, most people around the president, when we said that, were a lot of them were saying, no, there's just like, this is something we really can't do. And it took a lot of people, and the mission was shared out by putting it out there. Everyone sort of got on board to think, okay, even of course, there's the stories of the janitor at NASA and like, what is he doing when he asks, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm helping put a person on the moon. And so those types of things, getting people bought in, and whether it's in your organization, that mission, whether it's improving your NPS score to this, define it out. Why are you doing it? And when do you need to do it by?
That's right. So write it down.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then, so why don't we actually, I don't know how many people are on. Oh, we have a few people on. Why don't you just spend 1 minute and just kind of jot down, what is it that maybe has been on your mind, sort of woken you up at 3 a.m. What is it that you're setting out to change and why? So we'll just spend a minute on that.
And it could be a community, it could be your organization, could be whatever. It could be yourself, like a personal mission.
Mm-hmm. And then feel free to jot down what your mission is in the chat.
Maybe we let's keep rolling along, because I know we're a little bit shorter on time, but maybe if some folks it looks like Kurt's on. Kurt, what's your mission? People understanding of how to apply behavioral science at work, of course. Yes. So what is the when do you get that mission? What are the distinct things you're going to do to get that mission solved by a certain time, Kurt? Throwing a question back to his response, but and we'll get Kurt on probably later as we get into the discussion section. We can keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So rule of thumb number 2 is that you need to find and then you need to make allies. And so whatever this thing is that you're setting out to do, the great news is there's a lot of wonderful people in the world who also want to do that thing. So you want to find your kindred spirits. You want to find the people that you don't have to explain it to. Like if they're already of this mindset, they already have this shared vision with you. The idea that we're stronger together, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that part can really bolster you as well, like finding people, feeling like you have shoulder to shoulder allies, even if they're on the other side of the planet. The second piece, though, is once you've found those groups and you've started to make these connections, of course, the next piece is really about making more allies. It's about building the bandwagon. And this is one where it helps, to Kurt's earlier point about behavioral science, it helps to understand a little bit about, just how people work. And some of the things that are true when you're trying to influence change. One of the biggest things is that if you're in some sort of leadership role, so it doesn't mean manager, it doesn't mean like elected official, but if you're in some sort of leadership role in the sense that you have a really strong network, you have a lot of influence, you have a lot of really great friends and people listen to you and respect you, what you say and what you do, the behavior that you model actually goes much further. It has much stronger impact. And even if you aren't in some sort of leadership role, one of the things that Dave and I talk a lot about is the research around likability, just like the sheer idea that even somebody who's likable and like moderately competent, people flock to that person much more than they do to people who are like incredibly competent but not that likable. And so for me, I always found that like very, very surprising. I'm an engineer by training. I assume that people would flock to the most capable person. But being likable, super easy. It's actually very bucket filling for you and for the people around you. So it's a great way to be able to influence change. And as Kurt says, people tend to mirror others' behavior. And so as you model what it is you hope to see, you really are setting a tone, you're setting an example, and it actually you can inspire change, not just with the people around you, but there's this idea of the ripple effect that what you do can go out 3 layers, that the people you know, the people they know, and the people they know. So 3 degrees of separation, that's halfway to Kevin Bacon. So what you do has a really, really big impact, particularly when you're doing things around a mission. All right, the next rule of thumb is acting incrementally together. So whenever there's status quo, and earlier Anna had mentioned sustainability and environmental factors. And whenever there's status quo, you have to think incrementally. So change is rarely fast. It always needs to happen working together, and it always needs to happen through incremental change. So for example, one of the things that Dave often talks about is the life of a scientist. And particularly in academia, it's that people stand on the shoulders of the people before them. So you in your whole career, your whole body of work may be some sort of incremental change, but then the people behind you make change, and then the people or ahead of you make change. And so you sort of build upon each other.
Well, and even thinking about something in recent history too is even the plastic straw movement, right? To try towards climate change, and thinking of, that's relatively a fairly incremental step towards climate change, but it was something that people could get around. It was very focused on what it is, and people reacted quite quickly. Now, it's not going to be the solution that's going to get us where we want to be, but a lot of people, even over that little incremental change, made good progress around that. I mean, still to be determined, but that's just an example of something that can be done.
So one example of not acting incrementally, because we thought it would be helpful to see what might that look like. So we brainstormed ideas. We thought pretty much any political topic today would basically, I feel like somebody would come knock on my door and be like, what, so we decided to stay away from current politics. But we went back to the 20s to look for an example where there was massive change. And so in the 20s, you may remember from history class that that the prohibition was made, I think, into federal law. And so across the country, you weren't allowed to drink anymore. It was illegal to drink. And so the backlash to that was that people defied the law. And it actually had this unintended set of consequences, including the rise of organized crime. And so when you look back, people who, so I drink, I mean, I love a glass of wine, but so I don't really necessarily support the movement. But I think the idea is that if you make these sorts of dramatic changes and you don't bring people along and you don't have these incremental changes, you can and should expect backlash. One of the quotes I saw when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away recently, I saw a retrospective, and she had talked about this idea that there's a pendulum, and that at some point the pendulum will always swing back, and that we should just expect that. But when we think about long-term cultural change, particularly as it comes to equity, as it comes to sustainability, all of these things that are so near and dear to many of us, we do really have to think about incremental change rather than burn this mother down kind of change.
Despite the desire to do it, right?
I know, man. I have the urge to burn this mother down. Feels really good to me, but it's not effective. All right, next.
Very timely for this time of year. This next one, right? Seeing all the squirrels around.
That's right. Yeah. Chasing nuts. So along the way, you're going to get distracted. There's going to be lots of like, hey, there's a squirrel moments. You're going to see shiny objects. Right. So one of the things that we read from Linda Hirschman, she's written a few books on both the civil rights movement and the gay rights movement. And she has lessons, she said. And one of the most critical lessons is don't take up every progressive movement that seems interesting. At the beginning, new movements don't have a lot of spare capital, and they need to keep it on the things that keep them together rather than fragment them. And so what happens is this goes back to that mission. Like when you find yourself, all of these other things that seem like great add-ons, come back to what it is you set out to do. Remind yourself, what are the most important things and why? This is as much a personal mind game as it is like sort of an environmental sort of cultural change kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, really staying focused. I mean, even you think of whether you're conservative or liberal, there's these different moments where you see that pendulum on parties and where, like, why did the Tea Party become a big thing on the conservative side, or why do certain movements on the liberal side gain steam and really, affect change? Because there's a lot of things, when there was the stuff on Wall Street where I was hoping, just from a pure, helping to have a little more fairness in the world with around Wall Street. And certainly, like, why did that just not turn into anything that was that meaningful? Was pretty small, and it wasn't getting enough people on board around something that was clear, something that could get people together, enough allies, and reaching that tipping point.
Mm-hmm. Next rule of thumb is that this is an ultra marathon, that this is not a sprint. And again, this goes back to the idea that change takes time. Change takes a lot of people working together. And in that process, it's finding ways to enjoy the journey. So maybe you're learning about yourself. Maybe you're learning how you deal with, for me, learning how I deal with rage and anger and feelings of betrayal, all of these things that I've felt over the last few years, sort of culturally, and really expanding sort of the sense of like, how do you continue making progress, understand what it is that I set out to do or what we set out to do together, and finding those moments of small victories, because you have to take, even if the victory is like you went to a march and it was just fun, so enjoy it. Like, let that be something that sort of fills your bucket. There will be tough times. Anytime you're trying to make change, there will be tough times. So find the joy in the good.
And of course, the challenge is we're always fighting nature, right? So when you think about fighting nature, if anyone's read Thinking Fast and Slow, or of course we have Kurt, and I don't know if Tim's here too with on the behavioral science side, there's a lot of things that we are just wired for in a way that some might say irrational, but it may actually be very rational for how our biology and how we have evolved over time. And so we tend to be quick acting. We tend to want to make quick decisions, tend to be impulsive, and want to just, we get emotional. We see something, when we don't like. And Sarita, do you want to advance that? So we tend to be quick acting, and we also just value the present over the past a lot. And so when we're looking at things, whether it's over the past or over the future, when we look back in time or look forward in time, we're tending to value a lot more that's close to us. So that's a challenge when you're thinking about things that are, whatever actions I do now may impact generations from now, or even just a few years from now. Will I value that as much? So creating a fair calculation in that. And of course, valuing the unknown over the unknown. And certainly we talked about that earlier, where the importance of, we know something, we might not like it, but we know it, so we feel at least a little bit better than that unknown, where it might be slightly better, but we just don't know enough, and we discount it. And of course, being overconfident is a challenge that all of us as humans have. We all are much more confident in many capacities. We have, and as tied with that is our memories are oftentimes not the best. So when you're overconfident and you don't have great memories, and maybe we're a little bit better because we think, oh, well, I have a video of this, or I have a picture of this. And it's still surprising how often we can take things out of context. I was at the University of Minnesota this weekend, was biking over by the campus, and I went there for undergrad many years ago now. And just how things have changed so much. But I was like, oh, that building's there, but I remembered it differently. And it wasn't like anything else happened. It just that your memories are not going to be always great. And sometimes those memories are actually things that can be actual false memories that we put in there. I always think of the Brian Williams story that was relatively recent in history, where he was the journalist that got a lot of flack because he had said that he was fired upon when he was doing a story out in the Middle East. And it turned out it actually wasn't true. And you listen to him speak many times before he said it in this interview, and he didn't say that. He was saying the story accurately, but over time, as you keep on repeating things and things change a little and they shift a little, eventually he said that in an interview, and he was pretty set that he thought that happened. And so again, those memories. So all these things are things that we are facing, but they're also things that others are facing that we're trying to make change around, whether it's journalists, politicians, bosses, whomever it is. And so we just know how we communicate information. We should take these factors into play, how, trying to build in patience, and these, just trying to be more understanding in knowing that we're imperfect and they're imperfect. And how do we, again, try, if we want, the long goal is having that mission that we're trying to achieve. Eventually that mission, that group is going to have to become bigger and bigger, that are going to get bought on board. So how do we do things in a way that help overcome some of these biases that we have and others have? So let's go on to the next slide now. And when we can think about how we do this, of course, is trying to figure out how many win-win, how do we do that win-win versus us, them. And we have a tendency to do us, them a lot. Of course, talking about hockey here in Minnesota, you can be fighting. And I don't know if you want to advance that. We can be fighting, or we can be shaking hands with others. And so that win-win versus us, them. And I think we've been very, the cancel culture that we have nowadays and all these other things where we're trying to stand out more. Partly, I think some people are just on social and they're trying to get their followers and to get some cred and all that. But I think a lot of it is people think they're doing the right thing by just discounting what people say and when people could be genuinely mistaken on things too. And so thinking about how to create more scenarios, more conversations that will lead to a win-win versus an us-them.
I think that's right. And I think part of it also is just like having the compassion to know that people make mistakes. I mean, if I do feel like if I took any little snippets of things that I said 5 or 10 years ago, I'd probably be really embarrassed. You could probably find a bunch of stuff where I would say, did I say that? So, yeah, I think it's hard because of course it's so polarized, but I think for us, like working compassion back into these conversations, asking people, is that really what you meant? Here's the impact that had. And, giving them a chance to really think about it. Was that what I intended to do? And I think doing that sort of like trust building and that sense of like, as we talked about earlier, like modeling that idea that like, we're all human. We all make mistakes. So let me explain what this felt like for me. And I feel like almost always when you have somebody's context and you understand their story, you almost always come together. It almost always becomes a we rather than an us versus them.
Exactly. It's amazing how many. So, and some years ago, I actually had met Scalia. I went to law school and I had met Justice Scalia. He came to our law school and he was, of course, talking about how good of friends he was with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And while they were just completely different sides of the aisle, he viewed her as a very good friend. They would play piano and cook dinner together and doing that. And it's just these great stories of like people that you think would be completely opposite, but yet they both respected each other as jurists. And at the same time, just knowing that, hey, we're going to have difference of opinions, but that doesn't mean we're not people. And just like as hopefully us as Americans, we can always remember we're Americans or Minnesotans or wherever, whatever. There's usually things that will tie people more than divide people. And of course, the thing that we have to be careful about is not letting perfection get in the way. So I think we like perfection. A lot of us, especially us overachievers, and I'm sure most people listen to this or tend to be the overachiever types. And the challenge with that is you try to aim for perfection all the time. In reality, oftentimes we want to just make some progress. And so when we look at, there's a nice, maybe if you want to advance that, Sarita, and we can look at this. This looks like this very pretty vase for the plant. On the other hand, on this other one, it does the same job. It might not look as pretty, might not be as skilled of a craft person that had done one over the other, but they're both serving the job that it's trying to serve. And so thinking about how can we build in more progress over perfection will make our paths easier to get. Again, we're trying to get to that mission, to that end objective.
So let's take a look at these 9 rules of thumb, and let's apply them to something that seems like a pretty fast cultural change. So gay marriage is something, I often hear people talk about it as like this sort of astonishing flip from sort of the majority being opposed to it to the majority being supportive of it. And that is partly true, but the story is actually, I think, much, much lengthier. And the path to getting there was much, much lengthier. And so when you look back at, say, for example, the history of gay rights in this country, back in the 70s, it was still considered a mental illness to be gay. And so in the DSM diagnoses codes, there were codes that said, homosexuality, code whatever, mental illness. And so what the activists did, working together, is they decided, okay, the first thing we have to do is we have to work on removing this as a mental health diagnosis. And so they worked on that for a really long time. And what they actually learned in the process was that the reason it was diagnosed as mental health was that psychiatrists who were researching it had patients who were coming in with mental health issues who happened to be gay. And so they made the assumption that being gay is causation for mental health illness, which, any scientist or even probably my 6th grader would say, well, that's actually not causation. So they started with the medical community. And then every state had something called sodomy laws that said that being gay was actually could get you thrown into jail. And so state by state, these activists worked on dismantling those sodomy laws state by state. And then finally, I think it was like maybe in the early 90s, I believe, they were able to actually have federal law say that it is not a crime to be gay. So then at that point, they could actually start moving towards the gay marriage, towards making gay marriage legal. And there was even an amendment in there. There was a proposal for a constitutional amendment to actually define marriage as between a man and a woman. So there was quite a few like hurdles and like just animosity and all of these things that happened along the way. And so I think it's just a really amazing example of like people working together and over time. And so let's take back these 9 rules of thumb and see. So you must be on a mission, gay marriage, yes. Actually equity for people regardless of sexuality. Bringing people with you on that mission. So there were these networks across the country. Act incrementally together. The first goal wasn't gay marriage. Or legalizing same-sex marriage. The first goal was going all the way back to the medical community. Stay focused, don't take up other causes. I think this is a great example. For example, say gender neutral bathrooms. Because there was so much progress, that's what enabled this discussion around gender neutral bathrooms, or that it's okay to be transgendered at work. Like all of these protections that are now protections that we would expect, they came on the shoulders of all of the work before them. It's an ultra marathon, not a race. That was a 50-year process. You must enjoy the journey together. I think we just saw the gay pride parades. There have been so many things, so many moments of like just celebrating any kind of progress and this camaraderie and this sense of working for something bigger than any one of us. And then understand and mitigate human biases. I think this comes back to this idea of having compassion when someone is opposed. Instead of seeing this as like a fight, trying to understand what is at the origin of that, and having compassion, because you alienate people when you throw rage at them. It's human nature. Focus on win-win versus us-them, and don't let perfection stop progress. So I think that is, if you're ever interested in reading up on history of cultural change, I think that one's a great one to read up on.
Well, and there's a Freakonomics episode around this that it's a good episode where you can find, or Freakonomics is good anyways, and I think it's both something like the original book is one way Sarita and I both got around behavioral science ourselves, but certainly I think it's 426 or 436, the episode of Freakonomics that has the history around this, right, Sarita?
264.
Or 264. See, memories are not great. Yes. I was a dyslexic kid Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to invite folks, since we have a small group, we're going to invite folks to, if you feel comfortable, to join the audio and video. Kurt, Tim, that's not an option for you. You have to join the audio and video. And we're going to just maybe talk through a problem that somebody may have, that we can sort of discuss these 9 steps together on how that would apply to a certain situation. And so if you click, Sarita will let you in if you click on join audio and video. And again, you don't have to. I know a couple people had left because, I'm sure they're like, no, I don't want to be on, but don't have to be. But if you want to join, join. No pressure, Tim and Kurt.
So we have Kurt, we have Eduardo.
Hey, Kurt. You did your hair and everything. Excellent. Okay. So anyone else wants to join before we'll just start chatting through something? And does anyone have that they also want to share in the chat session, a problem that they've been working on? That would be one to go through these steps, either community one or work one or something like that. We can sort of talk through the 9 steps and relate to that. Eduardo.
Hi, Eduardo.
Hi.
Eduardo, what's on your mind? What's a social change or a mission-oriented change you've got on your mind?
Eye contact. I believe that we make far too little use of eye contact in our culture. People don't understand the power of it. They tend to fear it and not embrace it. I believe that if we doubled the average eye contact episode, which has been measured by researchers to be about 3, doubled that to 6 seconds, we would have an amazing level of impact on the experience of human connection and all the ills, many of the ills that we experience in our culture in terms of racism and so forth would be dramatically reduced by that. Mm-hmm. Also, there's an epidemic of loneliness that I think is directly related to this as well.
Cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of that research of the woman who said you can fall in love with anybody with these few questions, and I think was it like
36 questions to fall in love.
Yeah,
yes.
A few minutes of eye to eye sort of, I guess, engagement.
Yeah, that's a 4-minute episode that they do in that string of questions. 35 questions, and I think 4 minutes spent silent eye gazing.
So what might be, so if you're trying to increase people with, let's go through those 9 steps related to this. It's an interesting example. So what would be that mission that you think you could get people around that would get people on board about how to have more eye contact? Any way you would frame that?
I missed the first part of your talk, but I did see the little recap of them. So it seems like that, thinking about the example that you gave for with the gay rights and that diagnosis code, that seemed to be related to an awareness, like promoting an awareness of eye contact might be a way into that. Does that sound like it correlates correctly?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah, I'm trying to think of, so what do you think, Sarita, like building awareness, or would you even, because like dyslexia is a good example of that same thing where, you know, like I can sort of, before that used to be when I was a kid, it wasn't like, even though it was known, it wasn't known by like many teachers and other folks, and kids weren't treated for it and all that kind of stuff. But then there was a push to try to minimize this by just building that awareness. And then when that awareness of dyslexia got, and even now there's still awareness efforts, but there was a big push around those awareness of just like, this is a thing that kids have, and it's fairly frequent. So, and helping parents and teachers spot. So just building that awareness then helps people then say, okay, well, if this kid has these things, then you probably should get some help for that kid. And there's ways to sort of treat that. So I wonder if on the eye contact, it's something like that too, where just an awareness of how eye contact can help both from, like you say, minimize things like racism and other things when you're just trying to read people's eyes. And any thoughts there, Kurt, from yourself from a behavioral science perspective? You're on mute. I think your microphone might be.
My microphone was on mute. Sorry, guys. There is some interesting pieces of that, right? Where you're thinking about, you know, the bad part about behavioral science is that knowledge in and of itself usually doesn't change behavior. You need to have some other facets around that. You need to have some motivational aspect to it. So I think, Eduardo, what you were talking about, though, was some of the outcomes that you can get from this. And so if people realize what the outcomes are, I think that can be a really interesting facet that can be driven into this. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about it, my head goes a bunch of different ways if I think about those 9 rules of thumb. One that I would suggest that focusing in on, Eduardo, something that certainly resonates with me is I have a discomfort with extended eye contact, exactly what you're saying. It feels very, very intimate. And I will say, as a woman, I definitely know that I have been misinterpreted before. And so I think I made this very conscious decision, I think, in college, where I decided, like, it's actually, there's a little bit of a, apparently it sends signals that I don't intend to send. So I'm like very friendly. I love chatting with people. I just love engaging with people, but it can be misinterpreted. And so I actually have friends who have extended eye contact. And I remember my other friends being like, "Oh, he's so sensual." And I don't think that person is, I don't think that's the vibe they're trying to send. So I love the idea. I love this idea that, like, it humanizes people, that it can really connect you with somebody, and it can create this sense of, like, that human connection, like we have this shared humanity. And I think that's beautiful. I would also maybe spend some time just thinking about, why is it that people might be uncomfortable with it? And then how can you bring these things together?
Yeah, reducing the friction from people making that thing. Sarita, you brought up a really interesting piece, right? Is how much is too much versus how much is just enough. And so, Eduardo, that would be a good question from your perspective. Is 10 seconds now that becomes creepy and weird? Does it send the wrong signals? And where is that perfect point of making sure that you have enough eye contact, but not too much to be pushing people away? Eduardo, I did have a question. I'm wondering, with the advent of coronavirus and everybody being on Zoom and all these other places, how does that come into play, particularly when we're dealing with people in a little 3-inch video chat box? And how do we get eye contact in those moments? And how have you seen that happen?
Yeah, well, I've run some workshops around this with people, and you can experience eye contact and I don't like the word eye contact. I would have invented something else, but yeah, you can get very intense connections across the airways because connection really spans space and time. And most people don't have that experience. If you've ever had a time when gosh, I love eye contact so much and put so much attention over the last decade or so. It's hard for me to get back to a place where I didn't have this awareness in terms of how I experience it. But definitely you can experience it online. And I think that we actually, the COVID and all the Zooming that we're doing is going to ultimately lead to more breakthroughs in that because we're actually having more FaceTime. If we can use that away from the commercial identifier for Apple's service, but we are having more FaceTime, and we can have FaceTime with, like I'm having FaceTime with 3 of you guys right now and simultaneously. And if we were in a physical space, my attention would probably be just on one of you. So I think we have a multiplicity effect. And we also have a retraining of our attention on each other, which is really the fundamental of connection in terms of putting tension on each other. And we can do that we can do that online as well as in the real world. This question about the threshold, though, I think is very important because when people are acclimated to a certain, what I consider, generally speaking, a low level, how do you ratchet that up? And I agree with the motivational piece in terms of like how you get people to actually lean into that experience. And I often tell people that awkwardness is the gateway to awesomeness, because it's when we break free of our habitual, what we do regularly, like when you break free of your habit is when you experience more energy and vitality in life. And so that's one of the selling points that I've been developing, to have people invite them into a different experience.
So
I could talk for days on this.
It's so fast. You've definitely given me something to think about. I actually have a panel that I'm starting in about 10 minutes. So I have to drop, but I think if I drop, you guys can continue.
Yeah, well, and maybe we stay on a couple more, Eduardo, and I'm not sure if that will work or not, but drop if we will, otherwise reconnect. I'll reach out on LinkedIn or something if you, in fact, we should probably put our LinkedIn or things. I don't know how that works.
Anna already linked me in, so I think probably if people have our names, it's probably pretty straightforward.
But that is interesting, Eduardo, because I also wonder. So when you think of handshakes, see us, Sarita, I think of handshakes and how that's so socially acceptable for us. And so, of course, now with COVID, it's going to be very different. Like all of a sudden, like we're going to have a very different realm. But I wonder how that will work. Where, like, if that threshold, like if you get enough people, will people be? And while there's some research around 25%, I mean, what's that level that really gets people so that they're both a level of appreciation? I mean, I think handshakes are probably higher than that. I don't know how many people, everyone sort of recognizes handshakes in the United States, but you go to different cultures, there's different ways to greet others and things like that. So I think this type of thing, I think the question then becomes is, okay, how do you get other people that are passionate the same way you are, that want to advocate that out and around, this movement around eye contact and such?
Well, and there's sorry to interrupt. There's an aspect of social norming here, right? And Eduardo, you were talking about this earlier. It's this incremental piece, and it's kind of, Dave, what you guys were talking about earlier in, do you go for the moon, or do you kind of look at what are the steps that need to be taken in order to make that change? And there's an aspect of social norms where you're talking about handshakes, and the social norm in the United States has been in the past about, you meet somebody new and you shake hands. Not the social norm in other areas. So what it can be how do you get the social norm to be such that we spend more time eye to eye looking at people, as opposed to the 3 seconds and then looking away, obviously, is what you're doing. So, you build up enough people that are doing that, and then it becomes a reinforcing aspect, where the more people that do it, the more likely you're going to feel comfortable doing it, the less awkward that it feels for those longer people, for people like Sarita, who is saying, hey, this is something that actually people misinterpret this, but if it becomes the norm, then it doesn't become misinterpreted, it becomes the standard. So
yeah, I wonder if you guys know about the I got really sort of inspired to actually put more energy in this when I heard about the story of how the designated driver was created in the United States, and how it was something that it was originated in, I don't know, Sweden or Finland, one of those Scandinavian countries. And then a group of, like, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving and some Harvard Public Health organization got together and said, okay, let's make this happen. And how they cooperated, or they enlisted the screenwriters in Hollywood to insert just, it wasn't even a major part of the storyline. They just inserted that language, driver, and I'm a desert, right? And then all of a sudden it ripples across our culture. I mean, I think they had the advantage that there was probably only 4 TV networks at the time. So, but I was really inspired. But holy cow, you can make massive cultural change with some concerted and strategic efforts. And
Christina Becchiera, who's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, she does a lot of work on social norming in various different pieces. She's done some work like that with in Mexico about sex education using what's the Mexican soap operas? I forget. And so they insert those pieces within those soap operas again to convey this ability, like using protection and a variety of other things that were socially unacceptable or not talked about, at least. And so to do that perspective, you could really think about how do you find those key influencers around, and can they be demonstrating this in some of the areas. Again, I think you talked about television and various different pieces. I think probably we get accustomed, because when people are gazing at each other for longer than a few seconds in a television thing, it's usually a romantic scene, right? And so how do you create that scene where it is just the initial meeting of somebody, and they're looking at somebody with intent to establish that norm. So those are some interesting pieces that you could think about.
I think of that one TV show. Show that was around like Ekman's research, right? Peter, I think it's Ekman, right?
The Liar.
The Liar show, right? And I think of finding that show that gets people at least aware of some of these things. Of course, that was like the micro expressions going like that extreme, but like somebody that's talking about that, like a popular, like old Law and Order or something like that, like using how do you build in some of these things that people just even sort of like point some of that stuff out. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah.
Wow, fascinating. So, what did you guys recommend? Did you reference a book about cultural change history or something like that?
Kurt, did you mention something?
I did not. Christina Becchiera is a professor at UPenn, and she's written. Oh, Tim should be on this. He's the guy that remembers. Dave, you talked about memory before. My memory is not. Tim has that memory that can just pull those things up. But she's written a few books. So, and again, it's about some of the normative changes. Becchiera, Biccheirei. So, but yeah, and there's lots of really great research. I think, again, thinking about changing those types of behaviors really do need to depend on a lot of cultural and social elements and the norms that are going on inside of that. So, I like it. I am now going to be trying that as I meet new people. So you've already had one convert here. So there you go.
Yeah, here's a quick tip for you. Just notice the color of their eyes, right? Repeatedly notice that. Maybe you just look for changes in their eyes. That's not as and that duration, eye contact is
Yeah.
more than duration, right? There's intensity, there's field of view, there's so many variables that are not even, that we don't even think about in terms of how we do it. And no one's ever intimidated by the gaze of an infant.
Yeah. Interesting. We just on a side note of that just spurred in my head. We had talked with John Barg, who's done a lot of research on priming and various different subtle cues, like holding a warm cup and then shaking somebody's hand, you feeling warmer and various different things. Yeah. So we talked with him, and his one message, he said, so when you first meet somebody, to get them to like you, just pay attention to them. You don't even have to, because again, we talked about mirroring earlier. As a human, we tend to mirror others' behaviors, and when people mirror our behaviors, we like them better. And part of that paying attention is obviously some of that eye contact and paying attention to that. So I think it's all.
Yeah, I boiled it down to eye contact because 60% of our brain is, and people don't. If you tell people to pay attention, well, most people don't even know what that really means, right? Other than directing their eyes. And I think that maybe I appreciate you raising it again, because I'm thinking like maybe I should talk more about how to actually pay attention, because I think that's critical.
Well, and so I shared in the chat, there's
guys,
scienceofpeople.com. So Vanessa and some of the things she's done. Now, are you located in the Twin Cities region at all, Eduardo, or are you coming in from somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay. And Todd used to do this group, and now somebody else has just recently taken over. There's a meetup group, also a local meetup group of Science of People. And so one of those things, and I haven't been to, it's just been rebooted. So I'm not sure if it's going to follow the exact same MO, but part of it was even just how to basically interact. And we did things of like, around like just silent engagement with each other, different, how do you interact with people and communicate people silently, right? But still you can show that expressions and things like that, and have in essence an emotional conversation almost with just your eyes, of course, is one thing, but your body language and other things, and just posture, things like that. And so that Science of People, also Vanessa has a good blog and some things out there she's done too, so you might want to take a look at some of the stuff that she's done. I put in that chat, scienceofpeople.com. But also the local meetup group is on or it's a meetup group called Science of People in the Twin Cities. Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, probably time to go. At least now, Kurt, you've seen the Hop into. You got a little exposure to it also. Do you want to test out the screen? So do you see at the bottom, there's like the screen share part? And
no, that's okay. I don't need to test it out. But Eduardo, I would love to talk to you more. I would actually, we might have you, if you're interested, love to have you maybe as a guest for our meetup or on a podcast. So to talk about this.
Yeah, and what's your meetup called?
It's called Behavioral Grooves. The same name as I'll type it in. So
meetup again. So
it's another meetup, but we also have the podcast. So it's a fascinating conversation. So I think our listeners would enjoy it. Yeah,
I'd love to check that out.
Cool.
All right, Dave. Good seeing you. Eduardo, nice to meet you.
Eduardo.
And everybody else.
Cheers.
Amazing day.
Bye-bye.